بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا Muhammad وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أما بعد. Today inshallah continuing in the book تذكرة السامع والمتكلم of Ibn Jamaah rahimahullah. We are going to finish the chapter in which he discusses the manners of an individual with his lessons and his reading in the different sittings of the teacher, and his dealings with the teacher and the fellow classmates that he has. So he says here, point number 12 under this chapter, that if his turn comes, he seeks the permission of the teacher as preceded. And we mentioned last week what intended by if his turn comes is that they used to sit to the teacher, a few students would sit to the teacher, and they would read to the teacher, and they all had turns that they would take. So if his turn comes, he seeks the teacher's permission to read, as is preceded. If the teacher gives a permission, then he seeks refuge with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the shaitan ar-rajim. So he says, A'udhu billahi minash shaitan ar-rajim. As for this statement, then the scholars, they mention that starting with al-isti'adha, saying A'udhu billahi minash shaitan ar-rajim, is specific to the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the Quran. Meaning you say it before the recitation of the Quran. As for other than it, from the books of knowledge and other than that, then you do not start with A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. So the scholars mention, if you're going to read to your teacher the mushaf, then start with A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. If not, then you do not start with isti'adha. Shaykh al-Uthaymin, he said that isti'adha is only when reading the Quran, Then he says Bismillah. He says Bismillah and he prays Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he sends salat upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then he makes dua for the teacher and for his family, for his parents and for his teachers, the rest of them, and for himself and the rest of the Muslimin. And similarly, he does so every time he starts a lesson, or he repeats it, or he is reviewing it, or he is in the presence of the teacher, or when his teacher is not present, except that he specifies his teacher with making dua for him at the time of reading to him. And then he says, he asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy upon the author of the book when reading it. And this is important. We read these books of the authors, we say rahimahumullah, or the Sahaba, we say radiyallahu anhum. As for the Prophets, we alayhim as-salatu was-salam. It's important that we do tarahum on them as Ahlul Sunnah. We do tarahum on the scholars, and we do taraddi on the Sahaba, and we send salat and salam upon the Prophets. So it shows that the bounty of the teacher upon you, or the author of the book, he wrote this book and you're benefiting from it now. So you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy upon him. And he says if the student makes dua for the teacher, he says, وَرَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْكُمْ أَوْ عَنْ شَيْخِنَا وَإِمَامِنَا وَنَحْوِ ذَلِكَ. He says, may Allah be pleased with you, or may Allah be pleased with our teacher, or our Imam, and something like that. And he intends by that the teacher. And if he finishes the lesson, he makes dua for the teacher as well. And the teacher also makes dua for the student, if he makes dua for him. Now, it's important that we understand here that, yes, it's important to make dua for the teacher, but at times you find that some people go into extremes regarding making dua for the teacher and use terms that are not befitting. And you'll find that the true scholars of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jamaah, if you were to say certain phrases to them, that they get offended by it. It may be a praise, you and I may think that is a praise and they're worthy of it, but due to their humbleness and not wanting to be praised as such, they dislike that kind of praise. And this is well known from the audios which are widespread of Shaykh Al-Albani when he's praised, Shaykh Al-Uthaymin when he's praised with poetry, Shaykh bin Baz and other than them when he was praised. Similarly, as a point of benefit, Shaykh Yahya Al-Hajuri when he was praised excessively, he was not happy with it, not pleased with it, and sought that tawbah be made from that which was said of praise. And this is important to know, for you find some of them they attack. For example, Shaykh Yahya Al-Hajuri with this point, and other scholars as well. They are not pleased with it. If it occurs, then they correct the one who is pleasing him. So it's important that we understand that yes, we are commanded to make dua in accordance to the Sharia. or in accordance to the manners that are outlined by the Sharia. As for excessive praise and going to extremes, then even the Prophet of Allah ﷺ was not pleased. لا تطروني كما أطت النصارى ابن مريم إنما أنا عبد فقولوا عبد الله ورسوله. That do not over excessively praise me like the Christians did with Isa ibn Maryam. Indeed, I'm only إنما أنا عبد, I'm only a slave. إنما أنا عبد فقولوا عبد الله ورسوله. Say the slave of Allah and His Messenger. So it's important, yes, we praise the scholars and we honor them, but we do not overpraise them, for they themselves dislike that and not pleased with it, and it is something which is not in accordance to the legislative manners. Then he says, فَإِن تَرَكَ, if the student leaves off starting with that which we have mentioned out of ignorance or out of forgetfulness, it is clarified to him, and he has taught it, and it is mentioned to him, or is reminded by it. For it's from the more important of the manners. And it comes in the different narrations that starting with important affairs should start with the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is from it. As for the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, كل أمر ذي بال لا يبدأ فيه بحمد الله فهو أقطع, then the narration abtar, then it is not authentic from the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, rather it is weak. Yes, some scholars have deemed it hasan and acceptable, but the correct answer regarding the hadith is that it is weak and not authentic. As for the narration, كل أمر ذي بال لا يبدأ فيه بسم الله الرحمن بسم الله, with Bismillah and say Alhamdulillah, then that narration is also weak. Then he says, the 13th point, that he encourages the rest of the students to attain knowledge, and he directs them to that which holds that knowledge, such as a teacher who has learnt, or a beneficial book, other than that. And he turns them away, he turns from them the different thoughts which will busy them and occupy them and make it hard upon them to study. And he reminds them with that which he has attained from benefits and different principles and different benefits which are not well known. And he advises them with the religion, and with that his heart will become enlightened. With that his heart will become enlightened, and his knowledge will become purified. And the one who is miser towards them with his knowledge, then his knowledge will not stay. And if it does stay firm, it will not have any fruits and benefits. This is an important point, that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you with some form of knowledge, then know that it is not correct to be miser regarding it, rather you should spread it. If you're asked, and as we'll come to know later on as well, that you spread that knowledge, you teach the people the knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you with, and you do not become miser with it. It's mentioned in some poetry, وَيَجْعَلِ الْحَدِيثَ مِنْ مَذْهَبِهِ, and وَلْيَجْعَلِ الْحَدِيثَ مِنْ مَذْهَبِهِ, he should make the narrations from his madhab, وَلْيَنْشُرِ الْعِلْمَ وَلَا يَبْخَلْ بِهِ, and he should spread the knowledge and not be miser with it. The scholars, they warn from being miser with knowledge, and spreading knowledge is something which is commanded with, and the spreading of knowledge and the giving of knowledge is better than the giving of wealth, for knowledge also corrects the affairs that are concerning one's wealth. So it's important to understand that, but it's also important to understand that not every single form of knowledge should be spread to everyone. حدث الناس بما يعرفون أتريدون أن يكذبوا الله ورسوله. As Ali radiallahu anhu said, that narrate to the people that which they are aware of. Do you want them to belie Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So for that reason, Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, he has a chapter in his book Sahih al-Bukhari, باب من خص بالعلم قوما دون القوم. That chapter of the one who specifies with knowledge, certain knowledge, a specific people instead of others. In this case, it is not considered to be miser with knowledge, but rather it's important to understand that not all knowledge is befitting for an individual at a certain time. Someone who is a beginner, you do not explain to him advanced knowledge that may confuse him and cause him to, or deter him from knowledge. So you have to understand, or you do not give certain individuals knowledge which will lead them to more evil, and make them cause them to commit more crimes and cause harm by it. Rather, knowledge is spread to the righteous believers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it is spread to other than them with that which is befitting of their status or their understanding. So one should look into it, who he is teaching or who he is speaking to, and what knowledge should be presented to him, and what point should be made to him. You do not want to confuse them, and for that reason, as we mentioned before in our study of Fadail al-Quran, that the hadith man su'ila al-ilmin fakatama, that the one who is asked about knowledge and he hides it, al-jamahu Allah bil-ijam min an-nar, that he will have this punishment. It is something which is hiding knowledge sometimes is a must to hide from certain individuals, certain points and aspects of knowledge. But it is also important that if there is nothing preventing you from hiding that knowledge, and spreading it it has no mahdur, has nothing of harm, then you must spread it. And you're not to be from those who are miser with regarding spreading knowledge. And it's important. Allah bless you with knowledge. Allah bless you with memorization. Allah bless you with understanding. Then be from those that call to it. وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلٍ مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ, who is more better than the one who calls to Allah. The one who مَنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ, and he does righteous deeds, and he says I'm from the believers. So it's important that we spread this knowledge, and we are not miser, and hold it only in ourselves, and not try to correct the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with this knowledge as well. Then he says, a group of the scholars from the Salaf have experienced that the one who is miser with his knowledge will either not stay, or if it stays, it will not have any benefit in it. Then he says you should not be arrogant upon the people due to you having knowledge, or you should not be from those. You should not be from those who are basically surprised or think highly of themselves due to the strong mind that they have. But rather he praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regarding that, and Allah will increase him from it, and he should always be thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it. Now this is an important point. This is an extremely important point that we must pay attention to. For the strength of one's mind is from that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses a person with. And it is not an individual being capable of it, except if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him tawfiq, success in attaining that knowledge. So in that case, then the right of that knowledge is that you praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon it, and you seek increase. And that you seek increase from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it. Also, it's mentioned from Abdurrahman ibn Hassan Ali Shaykh, that he said the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you are to be thankful, they will stay. And if you are to belie and disbelieve, then they will disappear and run away. And the proof from that in the Quran is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِتَّأَذَنَ رَبُّكُمْ لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ وَلَإِن كَفَرْتُمْ إِنَّ عَذَابِي لَشَدِيدٌ, that when your Lord proclaimed that if you're to be thankful for the bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ, I'll increase you. وَلَإِن كَفَرْتُمْ, but if you're to belie and disbelieve in them, إِنَّ عَذَابَ اللَّهِ لَشَدِيدٌ, the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is severe. Allah here, and here we'll mention some points that Shaykh Salih al-Usaimi mentioned, with them being important points. He said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here did not mention that I will lessen the bounty or decrease you in the bounty in opposite to increase, but rather he mentioned here that his punishment is severe. For indeed lessening the bounty is something light, but knowing that that which is greater than that is that the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is shadid for not being thankful for the bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says not befitting for a person that he makes himself fall into this point of destruction by belying and not being grateful for the bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon him, in attaining knowledge. And the one who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens the doors of knowledge for him and understanding in the religion for him, then he should see that the bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alayhim, that the bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon him is something which is continuous. That Allah continues to keep spreading bounties upon him, and he should be grateful for that. He said that you should be mindful of this in your sittings, because you should be mindful of this in your sittings, because you taking a book is an act of worship in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you taking this step in which you become successful in it, meaning gaining knowledge and attaining it and benefiting from it, it is something which many of the people or other than you have been deprived of. And they are continuously in the desert of their desires, or the different shahawat, the different desires. And as Imam Ibn Qayyim mentioned, he said, remember, as Imam Ibn Qayyim mentioned, he mentioned a point that لو شاء ربك كنت أيضا مثلهم, that if you're like لو شاء ربك, if your Lord willed, you would also have been like them. فالقلب بين أصابع الرحمن, know that the hearts are between the fingers of Ar-Rahman. So it's something important that Allah bless you first and foremost with giving you a strong mind. Secondly, Allah bless you to the ways of attaining that knowledge. Then Allah blesses you with you being thankful for that knowledge. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses you with rewarding you for that knowledge that He subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed you upon. This is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He guides you to that path of gaining knowledge and attaining it and spending time into attain it. He rewards you for that time you spent in attaining it and studying it and being mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then after that, He also rewards you for the time you've spent. And He forgives you. And He makes you from those who are thankful to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We must understand that as students of knowledge, we are doing this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we hope. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to correct our intentions. That when we seek knowledge, we do it for the sake of Allah. And we know that if Allah did not bless us with this knowledge, we would never have attained it. So it's not due to our own strength or due to our own minds and our strong intellects, but rather it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that gave us that strong intellect in the first place, then gave us the understanding of that knowledge, gave us the different tools to attain our knowledge, from eyesight, hearing, going to classes, reading books, and other than that you may have of tools that Allah bless you with. And then after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you for it, although He is the one who bestowed you upon it. He bestowed it upon you. So it's important that we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for these numerous bounties and benefits that He has given us. Also, another point they mentioned, that one's intelligence will not benefit him without any purity. And as we mentioned before from Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, they used to say أُوتُوا ذَكَاءً وَلَمْ يُؤْتُوا زَكَاءً أُوتُوا عُلُومًا وَلَمْ يُؤْتُوا فُهُومًا. A statement that he mentioned regarding the people who are people of rhetoric or Ahlul Kalam, or people who have reached statuses in the people of innovation, that they were given intelligence, but they were not given purity. They were given different sciences, but they were not given understanding, the correct understanding of those sciences. It's important that we purify our inner selves and not rely upon our intelligence. Then he says also that one having strong understanding and gathering many books will not benefit him if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not enlighten his heart. Will not benefit him if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not enlighten his heart. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he said another statement, that whoever Allah does not enlighten, then it will not increase him many books except doubt and misguidance. If Allah does not enlighten your heart with the truth and the correct understanding, having many books will not increase you except in doubts and misguidance. So it's upon us to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us in knowledge, to open the different doors of knowledge upon us, to make us from those who are thankful to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala in attaining this knowledge, and to be from those who understand the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon us, so that we may be from those who are grateful and thankful, so Allah may increase us in this knowledge, and not from those who are ungrateful and belie the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon us, and not be from those that when Allah blesses us with something, we return it back to our strength of our intelligence, or the strength of our understanding, or the strength of our memory, or that I did such and such and I did such and such. No, this is a blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon you. Be from those who are thankful and grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He bestowed this upon you. And then He, after bestowing it upon you, He rewards you for it, because it's an act of worship. And all the time you spent on it, Allah rewards you for it, so long as it's sincerely done for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course the sunnah of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We'll stop with this inshallah, continue next week. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.